Welcome to this week's episode of Whiskey and Wealth Tech. I'm here with Jonathan Boersma from Meradia Consulting. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us. Today's a little bit of a different episode. We'll be tasting our whiskey, but then jumping into a pre-recorded webinar that Jonathan and I led regarding the new SEC marketing rule and what firms need to do to comply with that rule and what tools are available to help them do that. So, Jonathan, thank you for joining us. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
No, first of all, thank you for having me. This is kind of fun. I apologize if I start coughing. I'm still getting over COVID a little bit. I do still have my sense of smell and taste, so I should be good there. But if I'm coughing, it's not the whiskey. Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I have a long history in performance and headed up the GIPS standards at CFA Institute for many years, and joined Meradia beginning of this year, and yeah, excited about helping firms dealing with issues like the marketing rule and other performance related issues. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you being here, Jonathan. Hopefully the whiskey helps with the COVID symptoms. Doesn't hurt. But today we will be trying the Angel's Envy Rye that is finished in Caribbean rum casks. So I'll kind of share what the bottle looks like, but absolutely beautiful bottle. You got wings on the back. If you're familiar with Angel's Envy, it's definitely a standout on any bar back that you'll see. But without further ado, let's dive right in. So this is a really unique rye. So it being finished in rum casks, it's definitely got a lot more, I would say, sweet citrusy notes that I'm getting out of it, more so than I get from other ryes.
Yeah, it maybe a little cinnamon.
Yep, definitely some cinnamon. And so yeah, this is interesting. It's even a little bit medicinal, maybe some maple syrup.
Yeah, I was gonna say syrupy. Um, yeah, definitely maple.
Yeah, this is good. It fades pretty quickly on the palate, but it's sweet. It's good. This is a easy drinker. If you're not careful, you might have a much lower level in the bottle than you were thinking you would. But yeah, Angel's Envy is great. It's well known for their kind of taking old traditions of making whiskey and just innovating on them. So getting bourbons, rye, finishing them in different kinds of casks. And I think it's really cool that it's a father-son business that was run. And so the Lincoln family created it, and have really made a name for themselves for just the unique way they go about making whiskey. And again, with these distinctive bottles, that's some of the greatest marketing that you can do.
Yeah, it's a good looking bottle. It's almost like a dessert kind of drink almost.
Yeah, this is definitely a good after dinner, winding down for the night. Yeah, this is great. Excellent. Well,
it's opening me right up.
Yeah, definitely makes the COVID symptoms a lot more tolerable.
100%.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for joining us. We'll jump right into the webinar that we did. And again, my name is Alex Sermon, Managing Director of Wealth here at First Trade, and you are listening to Whiskey and Wealth Tech.
So the marketing rule really is a consolidation of some existing rules, no action letters, staff guidance, and And so in many ways, it's nothing new, but there are some nuances and some new areas that we want to touch on. I think it's really interesting that this rule not only references, but really leverages the GIPS standards. And I have quite a long history with the GIPS standards, and so we want to help firms in leveraging that, even though you don't have to be GIPS compliant, to comply with this rule. There's a lot of tools and a framework that is helpful in meeting some of the requirements. The scope of the rule really applies to two situations. The first is if you're presenting it to performance to more than one person, then the rule applies. Or if you're presenting to one or more people, and the presentation includes hypothetical performance. And hypothetical performance is performance that's not actually been achieved by any portfolio. And that includes model, back-tested, hypothetical, projected performance. And in most cases, this also includes, in the GIPS world, what we know as carve-outs. All of that hypothetical performance is prohibited, except if certain very specific criteria have been met. And in that case, if those criteria have been met, then it still is covered by this marketing rule. The second piece of the scope really relates to endorsements or testimonials that are done for compensation. And again, we're not going to be really touching on that today. First off, in terms of the actual numbers that are being presented, firms are required to show net returns with equal prominence as gross returns. So in the past, firms may have only showed gross, but now they're required to show both net and gross. Or sorry, they're only required to show net, but if you show gross, you most definitely have to show net. 1, 5, and 10-year returns are required. This is for those that are GIPS compliant. I think this rule is going to be much easier to comply with, but there are still some changes that need to be made, and this is one of them. So currently, the GIPS standards don't require 1, 5, and 10-year returns to be presented in a GIPS report, but that will have to be added to any GIPS report going forward. There are, as I mentioned, some restrictions on how carve-outs and hypothetical performance are presented. They introduce a concept called extracted performance, which is a subset of investments. And if you're going to show a subset of a portfolio, you have to make available the performance of the entire portfolio. So there's some rules around that. And then they introduced this concept called related performance, in which if you show not just a representative account, but if you show what most of us would know as a composite, it must include all similarly managed portfolios in that same strategy. Now, related performance is not a composite defined according to GIPS, because you don't have to be GIPS compliant, but it is a grouping similar to a composite. And the SEC has noted that that you should look to the GIPS standards and the associated guidance for help in terms of structuring these composites and rules for managing those. Related performance is not required. So you're not required to create composites explicitly within the rule, but if you show a representative account, you have to somehow ensure that performance is not higher than what the composite performance or related performance would have been. And so the only really way that I know of doing that is to calculate the composite. And so the rule also does say that you can exclude portfolios if the resulting performance is equal to or more conservative than that related performance or the composite performance. That's not really something that's allowed within the GIPS standards. So there's a difference there. So again, going back to the rules or the principles of, you have to be able to substantiate the performance that you're presenting, and you have to be able to prove that that performance is not better than what the composite or related performance is. You really are in a situation where you need to create composites. And so we'll talk about that here in just a second. If we can go to the next slide, please, Alex. Talking about net of fee returns, they do, again, allow some flexibility within the rule. And firms can either use actual fees, actual net of fees, so calculating returns for all of those portfolios and netting them down by the actual fees that were paid. Or they allow the use of model fees. And so there's two options under that framework. And one is to make sure that the model is equal to or more conservative than what the actual net of fees would have been. So if my actual net of fees is 5% and I use a model fee that results in performance that is 4.75%, that's fine, because it's more conservative. If it results in 5.25, then you've got a problem. So that's one option when using a model fee, is just making sure that it's that it is more conservative than the actual fees. Again, the idea is really to present something that is most representative of what that prospective client would have received. So if we can go to the next slide, this is really the heart of what we wanted to talk about today. The first is, can you systematically group portfolios by strategy? So that would be the first thing. And I do know that some firms manage a lot of their performance and other tasks in Excel. It's a fabulous tool, but probably not what I would recommend for any of these activities. So that's the first thing. Another thing to think about, how do you treat new or terminated portfolios? How are they added or removed from the composite? What's the timing? So a lot of firms, when they have new accounts, they might have a grace period to allow the portfolio manager to get the portfolio fully invested. You really need to have a policy and say, okay, after a month or after 3 months, depending on the strategy perhaps, or the asset class, that's when we consider the portfolio that's been enough time for them to get it fully invested, and that's when it gets included in the composite. Cash flows. Is there a grace period where that portfolio that experiences a significant cash flow is removed from the composite, and then after that grace period, it's added back? So important to have policies around that. If you have performance that goes back 10 years, you have to be able to show that 10-year return. If you don't have 10 years, you need to go back as far as you can. And so are those records available and accessible for 10 years? How are client restrictions tracked, and are they accessible? So if you got a handwritten note from a client that says, hey, I'd like you to start raising cash because I'm going to buy a house, send a child to college, or maybe somebody's getting married and you need to raise some funds. How are those instructions captured? And then what are the implications of that? Does that mean that this portfolio has become non-discretionary and needs to be removed from the composite? we'll talk a little bit more about those here in a second. And then I think it's really important to be able to distinguish between client-directed restrictions and manager discretion. So, for example, if in this example, what I've just mentioned, the client says, I'd like to let cash accumulate, maybe I don't want to reinvest maturities, or if there's sales or income that's generated, I don't want that reinvested. Is that because the client is directing the manager to do that? Or maybe the manager says, hey, I want to take some money off the table. We want to hold a larger cash position because of our expectations of what the market's going to do. I might move the strategy over time. So those are a few considerations there. Other things, sometimes accounts are put on hold temporarily. Maybe they're changing custodians where they can't trade the portfolio for a particular amount of time. Maybe in the private client world, maybe the individual passes away. And so while the estate is being settled, transactions can't be made on the portfolio. So those are things that you need to consider and have policies for. Does it need to be a certain amount of time where a portfolio is on hold before it becomes non-discretionary? So I work with a client now that has a rule that if a portfolio is on hold more than 3 months, then it becomes non-discretionary. And why 3 months? Well, they figure that over 3 months, they would typically, by that point, be having some transactions in the portfolio. And so then that portfolio would start to deviate from what the strategy is. So, this is a complicated issue. It's not just as easy as saying, oh, here are all my large cap portfolios. And that's now a composite. There's a lot behind this. And, certainly we are ready to help you think through these things, help you as you develop your policies and procedures and processes around this. And I strongly encourage you to look to some sort of automated tool that will help you in managing these. I know lots of firms have thousands and thousands of accounts, and that's really it's too much to do by hand. At least I don't want to do it.
I have 2 questions that are very similar, Jonathan, that I think would be good for you. If they're GIPS compliant, do they need to do anything? And if a firm isn't GIPS compliant, what do they need to do to become GIPS compliant if they're compliant with this rule?
Gotcha. Okay. So first of all, if you're GIPS compliant, yes, you do need to do some things. I mentioned the 1, 5, and 10-year returns that are required. So that's not something that you would normally would have been required from GIPS to do. So that's something extra you need to do. And also, I think, GIPS doesn't talk about some of these things that I had mentioned earlier about, testimonials or things like that. Certainly in the area of portability, there are some differences between what the GIPS standards require and what this rule requires. So even if you're GIPS compliant, you do need to go through the rule and look and make sure that you're doing everything that's required. Now, that being said, your job is going to be much easier if you're GIPS compliant. For firms that are complying with the marketing rule but are not GIPS compliant, yeah, I think if you're doing these composites or this related performance that you really need to do to meet the requirements of the marketing rule, you're a large way down the path to becoming GIPS compliant. And I think the investment that is required to go the final step to become GIPS compliant and be able to reap the benefit of claiming GIPS compliance is absolutely worth it. Now I'm a little biased given my history with GIPS, but I do think that is something that firms should definitely look at.
Those were those 2 questions.
Okay.
We've got one. So I think you answered this earlier about, do you actually have to go back 10 years? Which I believe the answer is yes, if you have that performance, but I'm going to change it a little bit. if you have more than 10 years of performance, do you have to show that additional performance, or can you stop at 10?
My understanding of the rule, and again, this is principles based, so there's a lot of specifics that are not present. But my interpretation of the rule is that you don't need to go further back. You can, if you wish, but you don't need to. And so that's my take, and I'm sticking to it.
Sounds good. Another question on your take. What is your take on the interpretation of the portability provision of this rule? We didn't specifically discuss this as part of this presentation, but if you're comfortable answering.
Yeah, I think my personal opinion is that the current guidance or the current rule seems to be very extreme, and basically says that if you come over and bring your performance from one firm to another, that you can only use that as long as you're at that firm. So if I join your asset management firm, Alex, and I bring over my book of business, my strategy, everything, you can present that for your firm now because you've acquired me, but only as long as I'm there, which really seems to fly in the face and conflict with the rules regarding mutual funds and the Investment Company Act. And so those rules are different. I expect there to be further guidance on a lot of these things, but I don't expect that necessarily before the November 4th deadline. So I think there's more to come.
Excellent. I hope you all are able to meet with this new rule and are excited about the way that the SEC is changing to be more principles based and really take the bull by the horns and make sure that firms are consistently marketing.
Thanks for hosting, Alex.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.